Right. We're ready to roll, I believe. I am Nonso from Code for All, and I want to say welcome to Code for All Summit 2021. The session you've joined today is called How to Put Power in People's Hands. And it's all about how to explore power dynamics and redistribute power with civic tech networks. This is a workshop session, which means it's interactive. And so you're invited to participate as much as you're willing to. But please, whilst the presenters are speaking, it would be helpful if you can, keep your mics on mute so you do not interrupt, and just be respectful. You can also use the raise your hand function if you know how to do that, if you do have a comment or a question as the session progresses, and one of the facilitators would definitely call on you to speak up. If you're not sure what that feature is, send me a message. All right, our speakers today are Lena Patel of Revma Consulting and David Caldor of the Red Cross. Thank you, our able speakers, Lena and David. I'll right now hand it over to you to take us through. I'll stop sharing my screen, and David, please.
Thank you so much, Nonso, and so lovely to see everyone who is here. I'm Lena, and my colleague Dave and I are really excited to be sharing some new thinking around power in social change movements, and specifically how you can apply this to the work you're doing within civic tech. Just to open up, we're joining you both from Melbourne in Australia, and in Australia we have a particular protocol that we start all of our gatherings with, would like to begin with that. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are joining you from, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and we are extremely humbled and happy to say we get to live and work from a place that has the oldest living continuous culture in the world. For more than 75,000 years, this place has been cared for by the First Nations people from where we are. What are we going to cover today? So we wanted to sort of share with you some tools and some new thinking around harnessing personal collective power within civic tech. And what we specifically have in mind for you is we've been playing around with these ideas of a compass and a map, and how you can use a compass and a map to navigate through something that you are involved with. So we'll be presenting a compass, and this will be the kind of like a framework around power. And that's to help you better understand your own power individually. Dave will be talking about a map, and that will be something around how collective action occurs. And so you have a way of navigating collective action, social movements, and we think this applies to civic tech. And if you bring the two things together, compass and a map, we hope these are ways that you can find a way forward in the work that you're doing within civic tech. Thank you so much for your introductions so far. In a minute, we'll be asking you where within civic tech you see yourself, but where we're going to head with this session is we're at the opening part now. We will do a very light check-in again, and thank you again for the intros you've put in the chat. We would love to find out where within civic tech you fit in, so we'll get to that. We'll share some foundations, so just some key concepts or terms that we're going to be using. I'll present on a compass around power. Dave will present on a map around social change movements, and then we'll find a way for you to bring that together, and hopefully you will leave with some new ways of navigating the good work that you're already doing. Okay. Thank you for letting us know where you are in the world. What would be really useful for us is for those of you within civic tech, how are you connected to the civic tech movement? And I see some of us here are from involved in other social change. What is your connection to civic tech, or what is your connection to social change at the moment? So if you can just drop that in the chat, that would be great. We will definitely be sharing copies of the slides, and I'll probably should have checked this with Nonso and Lauren before, but I'm guessing we'll be able to do this through the Code for All Slack. Yeah. Just a question for Lauren and Nonso. We'll be able to. Yep. Okay. Cool. So slides will be available through the Code for All Slack, and there's a summit channel there, and all the resources are going to be shared there. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to read this out as it comes through. So, Saad from CNAR Project, you're involved with Open Data and Parliament. Lauren, part of the Code for All whole collective. Shaji, you're Code for Pakistan. Yeah. And if there's any other kind of involvements that you have with civic tech, whether you're or within the social change movements you're involved with, whether you are organizing something, whether you're involved in particular campaigns. Sylvia, welcome. And I'll read these out for us all. Because of the pandemic, the climate campaigning and organizing work of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition has moved online. We have to rethink our future of digital organizing. Sonia, connection to civic tech, program manager, facilitator for Code for Germany network. So you work with volunteers and engage in policy work in Germany. Tim, hello, welcome. Joining us from Sydney, Australia. You're working with Code for Australia and more of a connector. Great, you're very much a connector. Excellent, thank you. That gives us a really good sense of the roles you play in the social movements you're part of. What I'm going to do now is, and Marina. Great. Marina, you are involved with Civic Makers. Welcome, nice to see you. Part of Code for Australia, and that's a community-led group building products for the government for a more sustainable future. I feel like there'll be something for everyone in what we have to share. Dave, I'm going to hand over to you for the next bit.
Thanks, Lena. Can you hear me okay? So I've just been madly trying to make sense of my technology over here, but now I have the chat open on a tablet, and I think the slides are presenting okay. Let me know if they're not. Yeah, really great to be here with everyone, and thanks for the invite. And just really happy to spend this bit of time with this network. And I'm also joining from Naarm, which is the Aboriginal name for Melbourne, and also recognise and celebrate the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And just, I suppose I want to also recognise the long-held traditions that have been present on this country and in this part of the world around community organising and community well-being, taking care of ourselves, our communities, and our lands, that I personally draw a lot of inspiration from as I go about this type of work. So I'd like to bring that spirit into this discussion as well. Just wanted to touch on some of the kinds of I guess key expressions or terms or foundational ideas that we're going to be using in this discussion. And I know that this community is a strong bunch of activists, and you're all, just by hearing some of the things you're up to and working on already, it's really clear that you're probably very familiar with some of these concepts, but we also want to make sure that everybody is having the same conversation here. And so we're just going to run through a few of the ideas that we'll be playing with and talking about in this next hour. So the first is community. I mean, that's about as foundational to being a human as any other idea. So I don't think this one needs too much explanation, but I guess with each of these expressions, it'd be great to just have a think about how this relates to the work you're doing and how this shows up for your work. In this case, what does community mean to you? What community are you a part of? And because we're talking about social change and movements of change, we're often talking about communities that are built around common cause or common values. Collective action is the things that we do together, and organized, coordinated, usually some level of strategy around that. It doesn't necessarily need to be hierarchical or top down, but it generally has some level of organization around it. We talk about other words like mobilization, campaigning, community organizing. These are forms of collective action. And it's about how do we pull our skills together to work towards a common goal. The idea of a movement, which we will be talking about quite a bit in this session, is quite a fair bit bigger than collective action, and it tends to be more chaotic, and we think of it as complex and adaptive, and no one organization or individual can define a movement or design a movement, and it tends to happen more sporadically and over a long period of time. And so we think of this as more loosely organized efforts of many, many people and organizations and institutions that are aligned under common cause, but don't necessarily have the ability to coordinate closely. All of this is, I guess, working towards the long-term change that we're all seeking and that we envisage in the world. And we think of that as social change, which can be a difficult idea to define really clearly. But in our work, we think of it as it's those shifts in behaviors, relationships, institutions that play out over time as a result of our actions individually and collectively, that the collective weight of that transforms our cultures and our institutions for the better. So with those in mind, I suppose the underpinning theme, and one that Lena will talk to in more depth, is the idea of power itself. And there's many different definitions of power, but the simple way of framing it that we're going to bring into this conversation is really just around what ability and agency you have to participate and to influence within communities, within movements, as well as what ability and agency do those around us have to participate, and how might we be able to use our power to open up that participation for others. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Lena.
Thank you.
But also just, I'll quickly mention that if there are any questions around definitions, and I see Lena's been posting some into the chat. If there's any further clarifications, just feel free to post them in the chat as a question, and we can respond to it as we go.
Thanks, Dave. Wonderful setup there for us to chat to you about, I want to introduce a power framework. So the metaphors that we are using in this workshop are a compass and a map. And we really like the idea that these are kind of tools that you can use as and when you want to find a way forward in something that you are doing. So the next little bit, I'll be spending 15 minutes, again, sharing a few definitions and inviting you to think about what these definitions might mean for you. So in terms of this idea of a compass, what I wanted to share with you was the ways in which the individual power that you have as a person can help you to navigate and to influence change. So in presenting this framework on individual power, it's really an opportunity for you to reflect on your definition of power and how you think of yourself and the power that you do have, and also the kind of life that you get to live on account of the power that you have. Okay. Oh, before we get to the next slide, I just sort of wanted to a few more points on sharing. Sorry, a few more points on framing. What I'm hoping to do is give you a working definition of power and your individual power that is motivating. So that I hope that by the end of what I have to share, you are leaving with a more positive, more sort of enabled definition of power for yourself. And you can see how the power that you individually have is a good thing. And it's a thing that helps you to live the amazing life that you do. So starting off, and this is sort of bouncing off that sort of last slide around the definition of power, what I want to offer to you is the definition of power that we are using is that power is the ability to effect change. So if you want to be able to make a change, or whenever you do something that creates a change in the world, that is you using your power. So your ability to access resources and to be able to get things done is you using your power. Essentially, where I'm going with this, if you want to achieve anything, then you are enacting power. And so what I want to offer to you is, from this perspective, I find it helpful to think of power as a neutral thing, and that it's neither good nor bad in and of itself. And it's more in its application that where the kind of good or bad kind of comes up. So that's where I'm sort of starting with power. And I guess why would you bother knowing about power or trying to understand your own power or even sort of wrestle with this topic? In my experience, people go a lot further when they pay attention to power. People are able to make different choices and effect the sorts of changes they want in the world when they have a better sense of their own power and power of other people. And I suppose the flip side of that is, from my perspective, power is present everywhere we go, and we carry our power with us wherever we go. If you don't pay attention to the power you do have, there is a possibility there may be unintended consequences when you are deciding how to what actions to take and what decisions you're making in your work. So what I'm going to be doing is introducing you to the work of Julie Diamond, who has created this power framework, which I have found very useful and relevant, and many other organizations have connected with this. And it's essentially giving you a sense of all the different sorts of power you have right now in this moment. And so if you wouldn't mind, next slide along, please. Okay, here is our compass. And I'll explain each of these in a minute. So we all exist in a complex web of power relations, so social, historical, and personal. Some of my power is I have inherited, and some of it I have earned by the life that I have lived. Some of the power I have has been acquired based on different experiences that I've had. Some of my power is due to events that happened to me, things I didn't have a choice in, and they either built up my power or diminished my power. And also some things, some of the power I have are because of the choices I've made and the life experiences that I've sought. So the first category of power that I want to bring your attention to is social status. So social status refers to the power I have based on how I was born, how I arrived on Earth. And so these are things like my gender identity, my sexual orientation, my class, my nationality, what sort of access to education I had, and also my abilities, so my mental and physical abilities. Social status plays a really strong part in determining my access to opportunities. And social status is, it kind of depends on when I was born, who I was born to, and where I was born. So these are aspects of my identity which are largely out of my control, and there are things that I carry with me wherever I go. So in your work and life, you may have come across these ideas of unearned privilege, of privilege. So generally when people are talking about unearned privilege, they're generally talking about the kind of power that is within this category of social status. So that's the first category I want to bring your attention to. The second one is social identity. Now, social identity is the power that I have earned. So based on the life that I have lived, I gain, particular power. And again, power is the ability to effect change. Now, my social identity is affected by my social status. So, having a particular social status might mean I get more access to education, more access to opportunities. Interesting thing with social identity is that shifts based on the context. So I myself was born in Kenya, and in Kenya we would be considered part of the Indian diaspora. So in Kenya, as part of the Indian diaspora, there's a particular social identity I would have there. Whereas when my family migrated to Australia, and we would be considered part of the African diaspora here in Australia, and we are migrant ethnic family, we have a different social identity here, even though I'm the same, female born in a certain place of a certain age. So you can see that social identity shifts. And then if I was to travel, if you're not in Australia, if I was to travel to your country and give a talk at a conference, I would have a different social identity as an international speaker from Australia. So you can see how social identity shifts based on where you are. The next category of power I want to share with you is positional power. And as I'm going through all of these, make a note for yourself what these particular categories might mean for you. So positional power talks about, so within this idea of individual power, one of the concepts is this idea of rank, in that every group has rank, and that rank is sort of a reflection of the relative power we have to the other people in that group. So the kinds of positional power you might have are formal positions. So, if you are leading an organization, you're in a formal position of authority, and that gives you a certain amount of rank. You can also have an informal position. So amongst your friends, if you think about your social group or even about your family, who is the person who most people listen to, or who is the person that is least listened to? And that kind of gives you some sort of indication of rank. And again, your positional power is affected by your social status. So there's not a lot of people who look like me who are CEOs of the top companies here in Australia. So, it sort of says something around the way my social status might help or hinder my aspirations if I wanted to be a CEO of a large company here in Australia. Whereas that might be, a different case for you. Next around is informal power. So again, on that concept of rank, depending on where you are, there's different ways that you can gain power in a group. So for some groups, so informal power is like popularity or seniority. So in some groups, the way you gain rank, the way you have more power is based on your alliances, so based on who you know. Whereas in other groups, you gain more rank based on skills and expertise, so based on what you know. So again, an example there within civic tech, if, and I'm not entirely sure how your specific communities might work, but one of the things I've noticed within civic tech is that developers have a particular rank, and that their rank is based on what they know. It's based on their skills and abilities. Whereas there are other parts of civic tech which is much more around your ability to influence volunteers or to be able to influence policy. And your rank is based on who you know, on how well connected you are and how well you can connect with other people. So again, depending on your piece of civic tech, your alliances or your skills and expertise is something that gives you more rank. Next one along is historical power. Now, this one's probably the one I find most interesting. Historical power it talks about, as you were growing up, there was a range of experiences that you had. So there was, what you saw on, in movies and in pop culture, what you saw in your family and in your communities, and all of these experiences, what you experienced in your schooling and maybe in your workplace, all of these experiences of power make some sort of impression on us. And so historical power is all those things that happened as you were growing up, which made an impression on you about who has power, and those moments where you felt powerless or you felt powerful. And so an example of what this can mean is if you felt loved and supported, this might be quite empowering for you now, in terms of how you go about in the world. Similarly, if you faced challenges and if you had a difficult sort of life and childhood, that can also translate into an advantage. So historical power is about how our history kind of gives us, particular advantages because of our life experience. The thing I find really interesting with historical power is as you go through your life and, you find yourself in whatever place you are now, and you have a certain amount of power, if you encounter, if you have a low rank experience, which means some situation occurs, some interaction occurs, and it reminds you of a time when you were younger, when you didn't feel like you had power. When you have one of those moments, but in reality, you might be the boss, you might be a very senior person in the place you are. In that moment where you are in a high rank position, but you have a low rank experience, that's the moment when you are most likely to misuse your power, where you don't actually realize how much power you have, and you sort of act out as though you don't have any power. So I find this historical power piece most interesting because if you get caught out in that funny situation where you have a lot of power, like you might be a quite senior person in your community, might be quite influential, but you act out because you have this low rank experience, yes, that things can go a bit funny for everyone else around you because you're much more heavy-handed than you realize in your response. Okay, and the last one, personal power. Personal power just talks to everything that you did in your life that added to your sense of empowerment. So all the learning that you did, all the life experiences you've sought, the exciting things you've done, the travel. I mean, who knows if we'll ever be able to travel again. We can go in, it's very exciting. In Melbourne, we can now go 10 kilometers from our home, which is, a big deal for us. So personal power is about all, how you go through adversity and just develop a sense of strength for yourself. So that's a really quick run through Julie Diamond's power framework, and I'll share her details in the chat. She has a book, you can read more about this. I wanted to give you this quick introduction just to sort of highlight to you all the different kinds of power, like right now, you have in you at the moment. Okay, got a reflection question for you. So thinking about your social status and thinking about, the life that you have now, what are you able to access or get done more easily than others? So thinking about your social status, what are you able to access or get done more easily than others? You can think about this socially or at work, specifically in your social movements or however you'd like to think about it. What are you able to access or get done more easily than others? And I'll drop this in chat as well. Just give you a couple of minutes to jot some thoughts down. And Dave, do you mind popping it back on the previous slide? And I'll actually put this reflection question in the chat. Thanks, mate. And you're welcome to make this note for yourself, or if you want to share it with us in the chat, you're also welcome to do that. just to give you an example of what I'm asking, because I was born into a middle-class family in Kenya, I had access to education, which means I am quite fluent in English. And because I'm quite fluent in English, I'm able to navigate and negotiate things in my life quite easily living in Australia. So that's an example of what's something that you have, which has then led to you being able to access things, which means it's a bit easier for you to get things done. Okay, thank you, Tim. Seeing that coming through. You have the ability to access support. Yes, that would definitely be one. And from Leander, education is a big one too that I covered to us underestimate. So having parents who bought me books, and books help me heaps every day. Yeah, that is definitely one wonderful way that power has worked for you, Leander. Thank you. Okay, I'll give you about a minute or so, and then I'll hand over to Dave to talk through map. It's very evident, Leander. We know what you mean.
Also, feel free to ask your question by speaking it if you prefer that way. You can put your hand up and we can throw it to you.
Yeah, Dave, you get started when you want.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lena. Yes, when Lena first shared some of this framework with me, I remember it took a little while to kind of sink in. So completely understand. It feels like it's just it's going to take some time to process as well. And also something that I've heard you talk about, Lena, is that when you work with this framework in groups, that it can also be a heavy conversation. So I think it's also worth recognizing that whenever we're talking about power dynamics, that it can be a tricky subject to sort of jump straight into. So feel free to share as much or as little as you like. I might, we've got one more comment. I don't know if you want to respond to that one or talk that one out, Lena.
Yeah, I'll just share these. So Sonia, thank you for sharing. Navigating through bureaucracy in Germany. My mother tongue is German. I had a solid education. This helps me get appointments with doctors, understand tax things, etc., more easily than other people who do not speak German so well. Perfect. That's a perfect example of how your power helps you navigate your world. And Penella, education as well. With the degree in IT, I'm quite sure I can get a new job whenever I want one. So not so worried for my own financial situation. even though our funding for Civic Tech Sweden runs out by the end of this year, but you have a sense of kind of confidence in your ability to secure something else ongoingly. And so, yeah, then tracing that back is in, okay, what was true to make that access to education possible for you? It's, yeah, useful to keep these things in mind. Thank you. Dave.
Thanks, Lena. Just clicking across. Is that showing up now? Great. So, so we're going to shift from individual personal power to looking at things from a collective perspective. And in some ways, these represent the two, I guess, practices that Lena and I have been bringing to this conversation between us, and learning from each other as we explore it together. And I've been really grateful to learn from some of Lena's thinking and what she's introduced there, particularly around sort of how we situate ourselves within the work that we're doing. I think there can be a tendency to look at the kinds of challenges or the systems that we're working within or on as almost sort of in a laboratory or something like that. I suppose our sort of scientific minds can want to jump to the conclusion that we can make changes to the system without being a part of the system. But why we wanted to explore the compass and then go into the map is that we felt it was really valuable to be able to first situate ourselves in whatever work we're doing and whatever community that we're a part of and whatever network that we're contributing to and whatever movement of change that we're trying to influence. And it's actually through those individual interactions and the spaces that we participate in that's how change happens over time. And so really sort of bringing it back to what influence do we actually have, and how do we participate in the spaces that we're part of and communities that we're part of with some awareness of the power that we hold. So I guess before I jump into talking a bit more about movements, just wanted to explain a little bit about how I'm coming to the conversation. So my background is as a designer, originally in the built environment through architecture and sort of urban design. And then that took me more into, I guess, participatory design methods, working with communities to solve or to address challenges with alongside communities. And I suppose working more as an interpreter or translator of a community voice, and trying to bring some of my personal power to accompany communities in their process of change and transformation. And that's allowed me to work alongside communities in Australia, as well as in the last 5 or 6 years in more formal humanitarian spaces, in places like Nepal, after the earthquakes of 2015, and now more recently with the Red Cross, the Australian Red Cross, a humanitarian organisation, and that's part of a much broader global humanitarian movement. As many of you will be familiar, the humanitarian sector in sort of informal and formal ways does some fantastic work, but it's also in the process of negotiating power dynamics and working out how to be more led by local knowledge and experience, and work out how it can bring its resources and skills that people within that space hold without disrupting or undermining the power dynamics of local communities that may be in need of support or may be looking for relief or going through a crisis or a disruption. So as part of my work with the Red Cross, we've built a team that is looking at movements of long-term change, which is complementary to the idea of recovery from crisis and disaster, because once communities are able to access the basics and stabilize during times of disruption, the focus shifts to long-term resilience and well-being. And so that's much more in, that relates much more to social change and long-term timescales And that's where participation becomes incredibly important. So our hope is that through exploring some of these tools, it gives us a lens to look at how movements work and what kind of people are involved at different stages of a movement or at different parts of a movement, that we can really understand what they might be wanting to do and create ways for others to participate in change work. I wanted to just introduce a participation scale, which originally comes from the work of Jeremy Hyman's and Henry Timms, who some of you will be familiar with, written a book called New Power, and talk a lot to some of the different dynamics that we're seeing play out across the world, particularly empowered by digital transformation, as we sort of shift away from, I suppose, hierarchical top-down institutions, which they frame as more old power structures, and some of the more sort of open source, radically transparent, non-hierarchical, distributed networks of people power, which they frame in terms of new power. And it's not to say that one is always better than the other, but it's about understanding the way these two different power dynamics play out in the world, so that we can, I suppose, look to empower and support participation at every level where it's possible. And so this scale is a way of thinking about the kinds of ways of participating that are present in new power tend to be much more on the right, and they tend to sit down towards the left in the more traditional power structures found in old power. And I'm sure that in this group and in the civic tech space, the preference, there'd be a strong leaning towards the kinds of relationships and interactions that happen more on the right-hand side, where people actually have agency to participate and are not only just contributing in some way, but are actually starting to produce and co-own the kinds of things that we can do together, whether it's creating technology, whether it's creating democratic process, or whether it's shaping, what the future of our community looks like. So with that in mind, I wanted to just talk a little bit about how we've been thinking about the difference between, say, a long-term movement and what we think of as a moment. So as I mentioned before in the foundations and the definitions, a movement is more of the combined effect of many, many different actions happening over a long period of time. And if we recognize that with some of the complex systemic challenges that we're facing collectively across our communities, whether it's climate change and how we adapt to the effects of climate change, or whether it is the emergence of widespread loneliness across parts of the world, particularly exacerbated by time spent in lockdown as a result of COVID, or whether it's mass migration and the challenges that many asylum seekers and refugees are experiencing as a result of being forced to move from their homes due to war or natural disasters, conflict. These kinds of incredibly complex systemic challenges cannot be solved by any single individual or organization. And so we tend to think of these as playing out as a result of movement. So change that happens in this space. And we look at perhaps 10, 20, 30, 40 year timescales. And we recognize that no one organization or individual can design start to finish what that change is going to look like. Instead, we tend to try and identify what are those immediate and short-term moments that we can pay attention to and see where there might already be some momentum or change happening, and try to support that and build traction and momentum further in those spaces. And that's where we can apply more sort of strategic thinking and community organizing, campaigning work, behavior change thinking, and the combined effects of all of these things, what leads to positive change over time. with that, I wanted to jump straight into the what we're thinking of as the map in this case. So we're calling it the map because if we think of the movement or movements that we're involved in towards positive long-term change as the terrain that we're working within, these are the kinds of people and relationships and interactions that are typically involved. And like every model, this is a serious oversimplification, but it's just, it's a tool to help us think about the different kinds of behaviors that exist. The reason we do this is, some of you may be familiar with, if you're from a design background or working on challenges from a design perspective, there's a temptation for us to think about people in terms of demographics. This is a person of a certain age, they live in a certain place, they have certain values, which is useful for us to some extent. We tend to take more of a behavioral focus, which says, well, how are people wanting to participate? How do people want to contribute? How do people want to be a part of a movement? And so if we are incredibly passionate about a particular kind of change within our community, we tend to think of these sorts of behavioral cohorts that we can try to bring into the picture and try to support and nurture in different ways, and bring our resources to supporting their participation, because that's going to strengthen a movement over time. So at the center of the map, in this case, is the guides. And we think of those people, these behaviors, as holding the values and the memory of a movement and connecting knowledge across time and across networks. That being different from the activators or activating behaviors, which are really the entrepreneurial layer within a movement. These are people with a lot of energy, a lot of time to contribute, a strong affiliation to the cause. And they're really out there leading initiatives, starting initiatives, getting things off the ground, activating and mobilizing other people within their networks. The challenge with this group is that, that they are probably many of the people in this room, or you will know them, they have a high likelihood to burn themselves out, because this is really challenging work, and often it can come with a blind spot around self-care and resilience. So an immediate question there in terms of participation is, how do you nurture and support people in this position so that they can continue to lead in the way that they are? Contributors are, so as you can see, the further we go out in this map, there's a decrease in affiliation with the cause, in time spent working on the cause, but no less important, because when we get out to contributors and explorers, it tends to be a much larger number of people who are playing in these spaces, and they contribute incredibly important time, energy, and resources towards a movement, but they individually may be contributing less, but this is all part of how change happens. So contributors give valuable time and resources where possible, but have a loose affiliation, and further out we have explorers who may be just taking their first steps in this particular movement. They may be just starting to familiarize themselves with the issues, and they may be values aligned, but they may not know exactly how to take the next steps. So with all of this in mind, I wanted to pose these following questions to reflect on. And they relate to the different behaviors that we've just talked through. And at the center, relating to the guides, the question is, who might hold deep knowledge and experience that could be channeled towards guiding others? And while I'm reading these questions, I would like us to have a think about what it is, what is the broader movement that we're working on, and that might be as something as local as increasing the safety in my neighborhood, which might be able to happen over a shorter period of time, but it could be something as large as, how are we building robust democratic processes across our communities, and how are we using technology to enable that? When we look at the activator space, let's reflect on the question, who's already leading the way? Who's mobilizing and activating others, but actually needs that support to thrive, whether it's access to resources or connections across networks that they may not currently have access to. And then as we go out to the contributing space, who's already contributing, but not necessarily realizing their full potential? How can we make it easier for people to participate in ways that align with their interests, their motivations, their capabilities? And then finally, when we get out to the outer layers, the exploring space, who wants to be part of the solution but doesn't quite know how to get involved? So I'm just going to pause there and leave space for any questions on any of this. And also, if you were to just pick one of these 4 questions as it relates to the work that you're doing and the communities that you're a part of and the movements that you're contributing towards. And yeah, if you are happy to pop a reflection or put a reflection into the chat, which is just responding to one of these questions and who that might be, or which group of people, or what is a way that you might actually be able to support participation in one of these spaces better. We'd love to hear it. And once again, if there's any clarifications, please just feel free to put the question in the chat directly. And Lena, while we give people a little bit of time to have a think about these, I wonder if you had any reflections just thinking back over the intersection between the map and the compass and how these two elements come together. And I mean, this is a bit experimental for us as well. We've been sort of working how they speak to each other.
Yes, everyone, you're literally hearing this for the first time since it came out of Dave and my imagination. I just wanted to amplify something that you mentioned before in the framework, in the map framework, around those roles of like guide, activator, contributor, and explorer, that we're not suggesting a hierarchy and that one is more important than another. Would be the first thing, and that actually a healthy movement will have all of those roles. Like you know, a sign of a healthy movement would be something about there being room for all of these different roles to be filled by people, and that, you know, if you are all guides, then nothing might get done, and if you're all activators, then oh my goodness, makes me want to lie down and just sleep for 10,000 years. And if you're all kind of explorers, I mean, really, again, nothing would get done. So yeah, you really kind of need a mix of all of these. This is not a hierarchy. It's just a way for you to make sense of the terrain that you're on. And I guess, you know, to apply the compass to this map, we talked about those aspects of yourself that give you power, give you an ability to effect change. So I guess there's an invitation here to, when you reflect on the power you do have, like what are you able to get done because of the skills, resources, rank, status that you have? How might you apply that wisely to nurturing the sort of movements that you're involved with? So, you know, how might you be able to support activators who are like quite often on a really fast path to burnout if they're not kind of cared for? How might you be able to welcome in explorers and, you know, help them to work out if they want to be a contributor, or help them to feel valued in their exploration? And likewise, you know, if you're a guide, there's a huge amount of like institutional knowledge you might hold about how things came to be, and like what might you do with that knowledge, the power that you have from that history and knowledge. Okay, we are pretty much on time. So if you do need to log off, please do. Thank you for coming along. If you can stay on, we just have one final thing we would love to hear from you on. And yeah, we're kind of happy to hang back and answer any questions. Dave, do you mind? Oh yeah, there we go. With your map and your compass, we hope you will go on and travel well. We would love to hear from you. What new idea or question are you leaving with? So from this session, what new idea or question are you leaving with? Put this in the chat. You can turn your mic on and let us hear your voice. What new idea or question are you leaving with?
And just to pick up on a comment from Lauren that has been shared in the chat. We often hear from folks who are just learning to code and want to contribute to civic tech projects, but aren't sure how to find a project to contribute to, which is a great reflection. And I think anyone who's been deeply involved in driving forward a cause or is sitting in a sort of activating, guiding space, this is a constant question of how to meaningfully connect those who are just starting to find their feet and find their interest. And I think without knowing the context you're operating in, I think regrounding in the power compass and thinking about what it is that you have access to that can allow you to play some kind of role in opening up participation for this group, whether it's connecting those people up with the guiding behaviors or with existing activating people within the movement. And I think that's a lot of what we are trying to do with our work at Red Cross as well. So that's a constant question, which I'd love to chat more about. If there's any more reflections, feel free to share them into the chat.
Sorry. Hi there. This is Vianney from Nigeria. Talking about power, I want to understand something here. When we talk about power, sometimes I often assume that being able to understand power or harness power kind of translates to leadership. But then I also assume that leadership is not meant for every person. Now, having gotten this knowledge on the compass of power, can we say that everybody is meant to be a leader if they're able to harness the power they have? Or that there are people that are meant to be leaders and there are people that are meant to be just followers?
The working definition of power, of leadership that I use in my work is drawn from the adaptive leadership sort of body of work, and leadership is an act. It's leadership is when you take an action that challenges the status quo. And so leadership is not just a position, a formal position of authority, but that leadership is something each of us is capable of enacting by stepping into our power. So I might not have a formal, I generally work as a consultant, as an external facilitator. So I don't necessarily have a formal position in any of the organizations I work in. However, because of the way in which I've been invited in and the way I'm conducting myself and the way I am working with power, I'm able to show leadership. So it might be useful to kind of think about whether your definition of leadership is just about somebody who's like the boss or the most senior person, or whether your definition of leadership includes something that every person is able to step into.
I think that helps. Thank you.
Yeah. Dave, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I just love that reflection. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's a really important question. I just wanted to pick up, I'm already seeing Pernilla add some more comments in response to Lauren as well, just in some solutions that have been useful to their work. And that's an open house where new participants in the community can come and engage with civic tech projects, and coffee and chat spaces. So yeah, I think there's so many ways, so much power that a group of people like like the people who have gathered in this space, who clearly have a lot of passion, and enough passion to come and think about, what kinds of tools are going to help you to do this work better. And even just creating these kind of communities and networks and learning across borders from different communities and contexts is such a powerful way. So it's cool to see that in action, sharing solutions with each other. Vivian has shared a new idea. They're leaving with, as part of a food justice org that's rebooting after a bit of a hiatus, map framework sheds light on why things feel like they stall quite quickly. Compass gives some hints on the power resources we could draw on to empower people in the movement. Great to see some immediate applications. I'd love to keep hearing the reflections, but how are we looking for time? Do we need to close this?
Yeah, I'll just check with Sonia's got her hand up. Nonso Lauren, are you okay for us to keep going, or do we need this? Yeah, okay, thanks, Lauren. Sonia.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm leaving with a couple of new ideas. I want to reflect on your questions more. I also really like the one thing that you pointed out, Lina, about the how misuse of power happens most often. And I think generally I will leave more inspired to sort of like apply, like talk about power more and make things more seen, because in our organizations, in our like very progressive leftist, like very grassroots movement, we are very reluctant to talk about power, but it's still there, and it's all, most of it is informal, and it's like really, it can be super helpful to just map it all out. So thank you for giving me the tools for that.
No worries, Sonia. And I'm just going to drop. I just wanted to say, Pernilla, there was a link. There's a question there for you for a link to the fika that you, the coffee and chat that you do. And just going to drop. I didn't do this before, but just a link to Julie Diamond's website, where there's like a whole heap of further resources. And I don't know if her book is available in any other language other than English, but yeah, really fantastic. Yeah, so there's a link there for the Civic Tech Sweden coffee. Great thing. Marina, you wonder about self-care. How can we use the compass and map for thinking and guiding us in how we can nurture our own participation in a way that is sustainable for us and others, so we can run the long run together? Yeah, Dave, I feel like you might have thoughts on this for the activators.
I really love this question. And I think we touched on it earlier. I think anyone who is engaged in long-term change work and trying to see things in systems and unpick the messiness of the world in order to make some meaningful contribution, I think this is a question that we should all be really asking of ourselves and then of those around us as well, and trying to hold each other to some level of accountability for how we take care of ourselves in this work. I think spaces like this are part of it, and so thanks to the organisers for connecting and opening these kind of spaces. And it sounds like the member organizations that you're part of, that you may be part of through the Civic Tech, the Code for All network, are all part of that caring network. In terms of some of the work we've been doing on the Australian front, we run immersive or intensive support and leadership style programs, but they can be very resource intensive. And that's about deepening people's, I suppose, identifying the activators, people who are already leading, and supporting them to to connect to the resources they need. And sometimes that's financial resources, sometimes that's about social network and social capital, sometimes it's about new knowledge, but really looking towards local leaders and asking what they need. Of course, that assumes that we have our own resources to give in the first place. So I think it's about having conversations, as I think Sonia just mentioned, having conversations about power in the first place and what we have to give to begin with, so that it's really clear up front what it is we can offer each other. Expressing our needs, I think, is such a fundamental starting point. Being able to feel comfortable and empowered to express our own needs.
Thank you.